Last day, Monday? I think it is. I love Mondays because that means we're getting closer to Friday very quickly because the week goes by so darn fast. Joining us now, State Senator Rob Sampson. He is charged up these days. He is fired up. Is there something going on in Hartford that has you charged up, Rob?
Good afternoon, Todd. Glad to join you.
How are you, sir? Nice to have you here. Yeah?
Definitely charged up. I'm sure that we're all following the news with bated breath, waiting for the governor to extend his emergency powers for God knows how long. Maybe 6 months, maybe 4 months if some of the legislative leaders have their way. But either way, I think it's time for that to come to an end. His powers are supposed to end on September 8th, and I believe it's time for them to do so and for the legislature to go back to work and do its job.
Well, so he can't do this himself. You're making it sound like he can just decide that he's going to be king for another 6 months?
Essentially, he can. There's a lot of confusion out there. People seem to think that the legislature authorized him to have this power to begin with. And that's not really true because there's never been a vote. What happens is the governor declares his emergency power declaration in a written letter, essentially, to the legislative leaders and says, I'm going to declare an emergency and I'm going to start running the state by executive order for the next 6 months. And from that point, there is 72 hours for legislative leaders to come back and say, no, you cannot. But the people involved in that conversation is a very limited group. It's the 6 legislative leaders of the House and Senate. So the leader of the House and Senate Republicans, House and Senate Democrats, and then the 2 legislative leaders over and above them, the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. So that is 4 Democrats, 2 Republicans. And then the other people involved are the leadership of the Public Health Committee. But the same breakdown, 4 Democrats, 2 Republicans. So essentially it's an 8-4 vote if it happens on a party line. And I fear it's not even going to happen on a party line. I think some of the Republicans will actually vote to extend this once again, as they did back earlier this year.
Did I don't remember this now. Did Republicans take part in authorizing the kingship?
They did not take part in deauthorizing the kingship, is a better way to describe it.
Okay.
The governor issues the letter.
So they went along. It was a unanimous vote then?
Right. Well, the thing is, someone has to speak up and say, I'm opposed, and then there might be a vote to determine a majority of whether or not we're going to stop his emergency. So
nobody was opposed, and there was no vote to block it. And you're suggesting that this time it could work the same way all over again?
That is correct. And I'm concerned that the legislative leaders, the legislative Republican leaders, might even go along with it. And I think even if it's going to happen, I think it needs to happen on a party line this time because someone has to speak up and start generating public opinion in a way to stop this from continuing. There's zero excuse for the extension.
Sure. The average citizen of the state has never heard a public discussion between elected officials or amongst elected officials as to whether any of this response to COVID is appropriate and whether the 6 months was appropriate and whether 6 months is long enough or whether it should continue for another couple of weeks. But the idea that it would be extended for any substantial amount of time flies in the face of the idea of having representative government, and it flies in the face of what Ned's been prancing around the state claiming about how he's the great COVID slayer and he's destroyed it.
I couldn't agree more. There are a number of questions you just stated. And you could be on any side of the COVID is a serious pandemic issue and still believe that it is the responsibility of the legislature to make the policy going forward. I've believed that all along. And it's very difficult for them to continue to make the claim that it is so dangerous for the legislature to meet, and therefore the governor has to make all of this decisions by executive order when they just had us in there. They just had us in there at the end of July. And we weren't doing the big, important things that matter, Todd. We were not talking about the state budget, which has a looming multi-billion-dollar deficit. We weren't talking about what's happening in nursing homes. We were not talking about schools opening. We didn't do any of that. We did a bill that is anti-police. We passed some insurance mandates, and we completely ignored the governor and what he's up to. And that's what they want to do again. They're actually talking about going in on September 8th in the House, which is the exact same day that the current emergency declaration would expire. I don't know how you can make the argument with a straight face that you're going to invite the legislature in to pass legislation at the same time you're saying that it's too dangerous for them to pass legislation, so I have to run the state on my own.
Well, why would there be an overlap? Why would he have them come back in on the 8th if he doesn't need anything from them? Is it to create the illusion that the legislature is cooperating?
I think that there is a push and pull, a tug for power between the governor and the Democrat leaders in the House and Senate. And they want to pass legislation. But they like this. They're having to get their cake and eat it too, because they don't have to make any of the difficult decisions, the things that we just talked about. They're ignoring the budget. They're ignoring all of the things that matter with regard to COVID. And it's super easy for them. They can get out of that by letting the governor take care of all that stuff. What they want to come back and do is pass a bunch of partisan wedge issue policy matters in September, just before the election, to help pump up their legislators that are in swing districts, and will probably also pass some bills that will put Republicans in a bad spot based on, whatever warm and fuzzy titles they come up with.
All right, so back to this timeline. It's been 6 months, and really 3 months ago, the emergency should have been ended because there's nothing going on for the last 3 months. It's been a peaceful state. The ravaging of the vulnerable populations happened in April and May, and then it moved on to other states to do its damage. And all of this posing and acting like there's some need for the great and powerful Ned to be managing the virus that is now in California and Texas and Florida is ludicrous. And what are you saying about what will happen if the legislature is in session and on the 8th, when these powers expire, and he will declare himself a new 6 months, and you're saying Republicans in leadership may go along with the idea of voting to support the governor continuing his powers? What gives you this idea?
Well, I'm on the radio this afternoon, talking to you, Todd, to encourage them not to, and to encourage your listeners to speak up and to contact the Senate Minority Leader Len Fasano and the House Minority Leader Themis Claridis and tell them not to. Just stand up and say, look, we've had enough of this. It's time for the legislature to do their job. We could easily go back in and debate the issues of the day that matter on September 8th, rather than doing whatever kind of political wedge issue bills they want to do. We can go in and debate the executive orders and whether they should continue or not on a one-by-one basis. We can tackle the fact that the state is facing a multi-billion-dollar budget deficit, and nothing has been done, Todd. Nothing has been done to limit the expenditures of this state over the last several months. Plenty has been done to damage the state's economy and the ability for the taxpayers to continue to pay to foot the bill, but the state is still spending money just like they always do. And this is going to result in a tremendous amount of red ink unless we start addressing that problem. We should be talking about it now. We should have been talking about it months ago. Months ago.
Yeah, we're talking to State Senator Rob Sampson from Wolcott. And Rob, it sounds like you're trying to prop up your fellow Republicans, like you see them as being weak-kneed, and maybe they need a little public prodding to be able to represent the best interests of the people, just like the Democrats?
Well, I would say my experience in serving in the state legislature has taught me a few things, but the number one motivator for politicians is fear, and typically the fear of their own constituents is the thing that makes them, choose sides on issues. And I think right now, everyone knows there's an election coming in November. And I think a lot of my Republican colleagues are content to hide under the covers and not have a debate about whether or not we should be tackling these hard issues. And that's wrong. I got elected to do my job. And, look, either way, win or lose come November, I want to know that I actually did my job to the fullest of my ability, and that I know I could do better than Governor Lamont running the state on his own, no matter what happens. Even if the legislature makes worse decisions, at least those decisions were made by actual elected representatives of every legislative district in the state, and not one man acting in an arbitrary manner based on his daily whims.
So who are these Republicans? Go through them name by name, maybe, so we know who should get phone calls and be supported in their decision-making as to whether they should try to end the state of emergency or not?
Well, I think it's worthwhile to contact every legislator, Republican and Democrat, and ask them where they stand on this issue. Should the legislature be voting on the policies going forward, or should the governor's emergency powers be renewed? I think that's a question for every legislator. That's the first thing that should be asked. And then once that question's answered, you might ask, well, if you are going to take over control of the state, how do you plan on tackling the COVID situation and our state budget and so forth? But I think the first question has to be answered first, which is, are we going to actually run our state government the way it was designed, with a legislative branch that is separate but equal to the executive branch, or are we just going to go along with King Ned?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, but I don't know if the average person knows exactly what to say about this. There's a lot of charged up people who would do a great job, but there's also people who I think suspect, Rob, that somehow the COVID is still out there and dangerous, and they need Jolly Ned doing this. So maybe that people are thinking this through and deciding that this is my imagined voter thinking about their legislators, that their legislators might just say to them something like, oh, well, that's not even coming up for me to vote on. That's up to the governor and the leadership. And they'll just pass the buck on it.
Right. Well, people need to realize that they have the most power. The way our system is designed is the individual person is the most powerful person in our government. I have 100,000 bosses as a state senator. They can call me anytime, day or night, and I'm happy to be responsive and do their bidding. That's the way our government is supposed to work. And I think right now, our entire state government, including the governor himself, needs to be reminded of that. And that's what's not happening. We are living under the rule of men and not the rule of law, something you and I have talked about before.
Hold that thought. Wait a sec. I want to interrupt you. We've got to take a quick break, but I'd like to continue, Rob Sampson, with you discussing that issue here, because I think this might be the key issue that people need a little reminder on. Rob Sampson, Senator, Republican from Wolcott, will continue. Stay with us on WTIC. It's fun when Rob Sampson is here because Rob is an ideologue. Rob has an ideology. He has principles. He has things he believes in other than the horse trading that makes up most of legislative activity. That is, I'll give you my vote for this if I can count on you for when something else comes up that I'm proposing. And there's this game of cards, basically, that's played with the power of the people that's in the hands of the elected representatives. And Rob's approach is this constitutional? Is this American? Is this something that fits into our system of government? Is it right for the people? Is it best for the people? And it's a way simpler way of looking at life, as opposed to the complexity of figuring out who you owe this to and who you owe that to, and whether you should just vote for something or not, even though you don't like it, but so-and-so wants it and that person wants it, and they'll be mad at you if you don't vote for it. Rob has a simple life. He just plugs it in. Is this the right thing or not? So let's talk, Rob, a little bit about that system, this idea of representative government. Why is representative government an important thing in the first place?
Well, Todd, first off, let me respond to the comments that you just made, and thank you very much for that characterization. I would also point out that I think a lot of folks might argue that unless you are a horse trader and a deal maker, you're not able to accomplish things and get things done. And I'm here to tell you that's not true. I don't know if I hold the record or not, but I have passed over 150 bills into law in my tenure in the legislature, something that is almost unheard of for someone in the minority. And that came from being able to work with my colleagues in both parties. The thing is, I believe I come at these issues from a position of strength and from a position where no one has to question what I'm going to do. The lobbyists in the legislature, they don't even talk to me. When I walk down the hall, they're completely ignored. My colleagues, their sleeve is tugged every second. Hey, come here, come talk to me. Yep. What can we do for you? They don't even bother with me because they know that I have a principled position on each issue, and I'm going to do what I'm going to do no matter what they come to me with. So I think that is actually a better position to bargain from, and that's the mistake that I think the minority party particularly makes all the time, is they come from a position of weakness and they feel like they have to give something up right from the beginning. And
wait a sec. That's counterintuitive what you're saying. What is the position of strength if you're not willing to play trade with them?
That people know my position to begin with, and it attracts people that are like-minded or want to align with those views in a way where we can work together. And the folks that want to do something contrary to those views, they stay away.
But how would you then be so productive? I would think the guy with 100 chits in his pocket, that he can call in on some big vote, that he's the guy who would be able to make stuff happen. How do you get people to vote with you when you don't build the loyalty with them that the other folks say is necessary to being effective?
Well, this is very difficult to describe in a short conversation, but I would say
you can do it.
Building loyalty comes from people being able to count on you. And I would argue that people can always count on me to do what I'm going to do. And they even know what that is before I do it, because it's obvious to people that I believe, like you do, in the American system of government. The thing is, Todd, people have this notion that the Republicans and the Democrats are trying to kill each other every second of every day in the state legislatures across the country and in Washington. And that's really not true. Even in the state legislature, 75, maybe even higher percentage of things happen more or less unanimously. So there are a lot of things that happen with both parties working together. And those are the kind of things that I'm talking about. It's just the big issues, the important issues about the direction that we're going as a country, whether we want bigger government or smaller government, or we want to protect our constitutional rights, socialism versus capitalism. Those things, you're right. We are fighting each other tooth and nail. But on most types of policies, it's a matter of just having people aligned in the right direction together. And that's the kind of thing that I've been successful at working with people on both sides.
All right. So explain the difference, because I think this construct of being a nation of laws, that's one of those phrases that people have heard their whole lives, but they don't necessarily have a vivid understanding of what it means. Could you give your wrap on that?
Absolutely. It's maybe the most important element, aside from having limited government, that is contained within our founding principles as Americans, that the law should be colorblind and it should apply to everyone equally. Our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, both are completely clear about this. And when you end up transferring power away from the rule of law so that it's the words on the paper that matter, instead to a single person or a group of people, that they're just making the laws each day. And I can give you a few examples. The governor of this state, right after he declared the emergency, he decided that some businesses would be essential and others would be unessential or non-essential. And this was based on what? It was based on his characterization of what he felt was essential. In fact, I remember early on, there was a press conference on a Friday afternoon, and I was actually on hold waiting to speak with you on the radio, and I heard Ned Lamont refer to tattoo parlors. He said, oh, no, that's definitely not essential. And that was his own personal bias making a determination about what the law should be in the land. And that's just not the way it's done here in America. The way we do it is we elect people to represent us across a spectrum, across the entire community, across the whole state, from every corner. And we put them together to debate these issues and come up with laws that apply to everyone equally. And that's the way we should do things in every case.
Okay, so we've only got a minute left. Do you have the phone numbers on the top of your head? Because the Senate changed its phone. Senate GOP has a different phone number now, I think. I don't know if the 800 number works. Have you tried it?
I do not know the numbers off the top of my head, and I apologize for that.
Okay.
But
I'll look them up.
Yeah?
No, I'll find them. I'll figure it out. That's fine. I thought you might have just come loaded and ready to fire those things off. So thank you for making the point. And the point is that the governor is planning on declaring himself king for another 6 months or some extended period of time. And we have to make sure that Republicans specifically, but everybody in the legislature, is prepared to fight to stop him, because he's taking their job away.
You're absolutely right. And the message is enough is enough. The governor has had power for 6 months. The legislature has already met. They're planning on us meeting again. Let us do our job.
Rob Sampson, thank you, sir. Great to talk with you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Todd.
All righty. So Rob Sampson talking tough on the things that need to be talked tough about.